What's your opinion about the recent findings hinting at the man made origins of the coronavirus in a Chinese lab? And is this virus a bioweapon? So, for a very long time, we have been told that this is a natural virus. It evolved naturally. It came from bats, supposedly, in the wet market in Wuhan. But what we find is that bats are unable to be infected with this virus. So clearly, it's not come from bats. And we have been told to follow the science, follow the science. But the fact is that the people who talk the most about science online are the ones who know the least about science. And it's not about following the science, it's about following who benefited from this pandemic. This is a geopolitical matter, it's not a scientific matter. If you create a virus in a lab and release it in the world, you're going to make sure that you're going to erase all traces of its origin. And therefore, science will not be able to find the source because you have erased it. And therefore, this is not a matter of science, it's a matter of following the money. Who has benefited the most from this pandemic? So the numbers are very clear. If you look at the numbers of the past year or so, you will find that the entire world's GDP has been shrinking. India's GDP has shrunk by about 7% or so. The US GDP has shrunk, the UK GDP has shrunk. Every major economy in the world has seen a shrinkage of its GDP, or maybe a very small, tiny growth of the GDP, but nothing like it was supposed to be. Now, if we look at China's GDP, I have recently found that it has grown by 18% over the last year. So, over the past decade or so, China's GDP was growing at less than 10%. But suddenly it has seen this spurt of 18%. So, how did China manage to achieve such an enormous spurt of growth while everybody else has seen a shrinkage in the GDP? So, clearly, China has benefited from this pandemic. And to a great extent, they've been able to place a lot of distance between them and the rest of the competition. So I believe that this is a man-made virus. It was designed by China and it was released strategically. For example, in 2020, you had these Chinese tourists in Italy who were saying that I am Chinese, I'm not a virus, please hug me. And the poor Italians would go and hug them out of compassion because they are afraid of being called racist or whatever. And that's how this virus spread. And China had already banned travel within China, but they were allowing people to travel outside of China. And if you look at China's history over the past 10, 20 years, you will see that whenever there is an outbreak of a virus in Africa, for example, the Ebola virus outbreak in the early 2010s, then the Chinese would send scientists to these locations, ostensibly to provide aid for humanitarian purposes. But what they were actually doing was they were collecting samples of these exotic viruses. And these samples go back to China and they are analyzed and they are tested. And I presume something else is also done with these samples of viruses. So the Chinese have amassed a great library of various viruses, and they have been testing them and doing various things with these viruses. So I am not surprised that they have released this virus. The current coronavirus is thankfully not that virulent. It's not that deadly. If it was the Ebola virus, which would have been released, the consequences would have been catastrophic. So I am pretty certain that this is an engineered outbreak. This is a bioweapon. We all thought that 2020 was the year of the virus. I am getting the feeling that the 2020s are the decade of the virus. I hope I'm wrong, but let's see. But I am pretty sure that this is not a natural virus. And now the US government is also kind of publicly saying that there is something more to this virus than a natural origin. So the truth is coming out now. For a long time, the Western media did not speak about this. They acted like agents of the Chinese. They were concentrating on India. They were talking about how many cases are in India. They were concentrating on the cremations that are happening in India. And they were not questioning the Chinese, who are not releasing any numbers of how many cases they've had and how many deaths they've had. The Chinese have released no numbers at all for the past year. And the Western media has not deemed it fit to question the Chinese, and they are concentrating on India. So it's clear that the Western media has been bought out by the Chinese. It's very clear. I don't think there's any doubt at all. And Even Facebook was censoring posts that raised questions about the origins of the virus. So I'm glad it's coming out in the open now. And I hope that the world takes adequate measures to preclude further occurrences of such releases of man-made viruses. So I am pretty convinced that this is a man-made bioweapon.